Greetings again, wizards. It's me. So we're back at the Imaginarium. I've got a book review for you. And just to remind you, the way that I like to approach book reviews here is I want to go through several elements of a book. And my goal is to give you an idea of whether or not you would like it. Because, I mean, how important is it if I like it, right? Who cares? However, you're still going to get my opinion. Nevertheless, today's subject is A Wizard of Earthsea. It's by Ursula Le Guin, and it came out in 1968. It is a classic of the genre, kind of like required reading, if you will. And its premise is rather simple. So you have a young man named Ged, or Sparrowhawk, who lives on an obscure island in the world of Earthsea, discovers that he has some magical talent, and so then goes on a journey to become a wizard. He goes to a college of wizardry. That idea is not a new one, of course. And along the way, he has to face some inner challenges and outer challenges. And part of what happens is that he unwittingly unleashes something that he winds up having to deal with without getting too further into the plot. There are some tropes here. And remember, tropes and cliches are not the same thing. Tropes are why we come back to fantasy. It's the stuff we love. It's the things about fantasy stories that we really like and we want to keep reading about. Tropes are good. Cliches is when a trope is done to death and nobody likes it anymore. So in this one, we have a coming of age trope. In other words, it's a story about the maturation from youth to full-grown adult. He goes from brash and naive to a wise wizard in this story. That's his journey. Another trope that you see here is the learning magic trope. It's one that I think it's very difficult to do well in fantasy because you have to basically somehow turn into an exciting narrative what is essentially sitting around and reading stuff. So I think that Rowling does this very well in the Harry Potter series. Of course, that's what a central element of that story. And I think that Le Guin does this very well here also and makes the learning of the magic really, really interesting and not dull. There are other authors out here who I think might handle this in a more clunky fashion, just going on and on and on about the magic, the rules and the magic system and all of that. I really don't care for that word, by the way, but that's another conversation. Some other tropes: confronting the evil within. That's a very popular one in fantasy. Dragons, because dragons. But there's also mysticism here. There's themes of redemption and ambition, how those two things interplay. There's lots to chew on with this story. The pacing is very brisk, actually, yet it doesn't feel rushed, which is very difficult. And I really admire Le Guin's writing here, because this book is actually quite short, and for fantasy is well known for having ginormous bookstop length books. And Le Guin apparently decided, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have a story that's laser focused, and you pretty much stay with Ged the whole time. And the story is about his arc and his journey. And I think that's a big part of why she is able to write in such a way that there's a whole lot of things that get covered, but it doesn't ever really feel rushed. The times where the story needs to breathe are there. The characters, again, we're dealing with a very small number of characters here. It's one of the reasons why I think the story is as long as it is. It's because we don't, like, say, in some other massive epics, we don't jump around to dozens of characters on multiple continents, right? This is not Malazan. So you have Sparrowhawk / Ged. You have his mentor, Ojian, who is a very interesting character. And you have a couple of other interesting characters too. Again, we're not diving into a deep character study here. The characters are distinct, they're straightforward, they have enough complexity to be interesting, but you never get bogged down in it. You never feel like you're diving deep into someone's psyche. Now, whether that's good or bad, now you may not care much for that. Some people really like that. I think Abercrombie does a really good job of diving deep into the psyche of some of the very twisted characters that are in his story. You don't really see that much here. At the same time, the characters are not flat. They're not just empty ciphers or placeholders that are interchangeable with other characters in the story. And that's what, unfortunately, you do see that in some fantasy. But you see that in writing in general, of course. I think fantasy sometimes may be a little more vulnerable to that kind of thing because you have so many bells and whistles with the fantastical elements that you can kind of, sneak past that. The world building, I have a scale of world building. If you haven't seen any of my videos, I do explain this in some of the other ones. On one end, you've got Sanderson, which is fairly spare. It's very brief, to the point, very simply explained. You don't dwell on it much, and you get what you need. And that's on one end of the scale. And on the other end of the scale, you got Mervyn Peake in like Titus Groan or Gormenghast, where you'll spend paragraphs and paragraphs on extremely Baroque descriptions of the setting and the world, and sometimes even the characters and like what they're wearing and all that sort of thing. I consider that, at least in my own experience, the maximum level of world building. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other stories that have more world building than that. It's just how much do you dwell on all the minutia of the details of a particular scene, and that Mervyn Peake takes that to the absolute maximum. A lot of people can't really take it, but anyway. So, what about the magic element? It's a fantasy review. So, the magic here in Earthsea is it's very philosophical and mystical even. I think that the distinction between magic, between hard and soft, is a simplification. And I know Sanderson came up with that. And it does help to explain a lot. But there's more that there's more that it can be said about magic. In Earthsea, everything has a secret name. And if you know the secret name of the thing, whether it's an animal or a dragon or even just a body of water, then you have magical power over it. I think that's a really interesting concept. But there's many deeper levels to this too. And in the exploration of the magic in this story, you get to see more of the depths of what Le Guin is trying to explore philosophically. And I'll leave that to you to read so that you can see where you think she's going with this. I think it's very interesting and it's compelling. And the distinction that you hear often about hard and soft magic is a lot about mechanism versus meaning. I think a hard system will be very mechanistic. It'll have lots of rules and Rube Goldberg, types of flow charts and that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting from that point of view in terms of plot and mechanics and problem solving and all that sort of thing. And you never run the risk of Deus ex machina with it, or problem solving via magic. The downside of it, though, is that you miss out on kind of the more symbolic and mystical elements of magic, and which in a large degree, in my opinion, is one of the reasons for using it in a story. If you don't have magical elements, then is it really fantasy? In fact, you could argue that Titus Groan isn't really fantasy because there's hardly any sort of mystical stuff, but it's just so dreamlike and bizarre that it's often lumped into the fantasy category. Outside of these two characteristics, magic can also be used just as simple wish fulfillment or just bells and whistles and neato whiz-bang factor, which is fun and fascinating, but not really representative of anything in particular. Le Guin is not doing that here. The magic is very meaningful and has a lot to do with deeper philosophical concepts about the universe and the self, and that's kind of stuff that we're dealing with. Themes here, there's a lot of subtext to the story, and in this case, I think Goodwyn does a lot with very little, while still managing to make it feel weighty. You're not meant to just vibe in a scene and vibe with the characters. Every scene has a purpose, and it's moving in a particular direction. And she doesn't waste any time, just hanging out. You may find that feeling. You may find that makes you feel rushed to you. So, word to the wise on that. While there is subtext here, it isn't impenetrable or opaque either. It's something that you can pick up on and maybe even just kind of feel your way into, but you won't necessarily be able to explain it all entirely, which I think is really, really impressive and difficult to do. The style overall, also, it's not modern-y sounding. Some of the newer fantasy novels that have been coming out more recently, the characters talk and use concepts that just yank you right out of the story because it feels like it's super modern or anachronistic, especially if the aesthetic of the story is more like medieval or ancient or whatever. That can be a distraction for readers. That doesn't happen here at all. At the same time, it's not pretentious and it's not excessively archaic, right? It's not impossible to understand what people are saying. So Goodwyn strikes a nice balance there, which I think you see in the best fantasy. So overall, I would definitely give this one 5 stars. And I understand now after reading it why so many people recommend it. It's good. It's concise. It's highly focused. And I can't wait to read more in the series. So that's what I have for you today. Don't forget, today is the day, actually. Today is April 1st. There's no April Fool's joke here. But this is the day that the print version of King of the Forgotten Darkness comes out. And you can order a copy on Amazon. I'll have the links in below. So, yeah. And some upcoming things. This coming month, I will be visiting Philip Chase on his channel and doing an episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy with him. So I'm really looking forward to that. Otherwise, I'll keep you guys posted. Make sure you hop over to ericgoodwyn.com, jump on the newsletter. I've got a new layout for the newsletter. And now if you sign up, you will get a free 10-part video series on understanding and analyzing dreams and fantasy. So given that that's kind of what I do for a living, that's my day job, it's a lot of fun to blend that with fantasy fiction and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I got going on for you this week, and I will see you next time.